Hey Rachel,
Hey, how are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good.
Any sign of your husband returning home anytime soon?
As of right now, we're thinking August.
Oh dear.
Yeah.
But he does get time off.
Yeah, he usually gets home. He'll get home on Friday and then he'll have to go back on Sunday. So, yeah.
What are they doing, Rachel?
They are pre-filtering the water before it goes to the water treatment plant because the lake got so stirred up during the hurricane. It had so
Right?
much silt in it that the regular water plant wasn't able to treat it. So, yeah, it's
Well, I guess,
apparently it's like an experimental thing that the Army Corps of Engineers is working on. So they have different um they've built a few of them and they're trying different things out. So, yeah.
so they think they'll get it solved. It's just taking a while.
Yeah, and I think like right now it is good, but they're worried about the rains this summer and like if there was another hurricane, what would happen? So right now they're just kind of like working on it because like it is an experiment, so they're just still running it to make sure how it goes and then just to see how the summer
But
goes.
Ashland does have drinking water.
Yeah, they got it. They actually got their water back like late October, early November. Yeah. So they were out for a few weeks, but it wasn't forever, so which is good.
And everybody else in North Carolina is good for water.
I think so. Yeah. As far as I know. How's the weather up there?
It's in the 50s and very cloudy today.
Oh
It's
yeah.
been lovely, but we understand we're going to have a very bad rainstorm
Oh.
late tomorrow into Thursday.
Oh.
Actually, it got warm and now it's gotten back into the 50s, which is more typical for us, for Massachusetts this time of year. It doesn't really start to get very warm here till June.
Okay. Are the flowers coming out?
Oh yeah, yeah,
Oh,
the
good.
flower and because we've had so much rain, everything is very green and very beautiful.
Oh, nice.
Got
That's
lots
good.
of, yeah, the rhododendron are blooming now and they're spectacular. It's been from this perspective of pretty, it's been a very pretty spring.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Lots of flowering trees, which are none of this is good for my allergies, but
Right.
that's been.
Yeah.
Well, I wonder where everybody else is.
I know.
John is normally on very promptly.
Yep.
And I know you and I don't want to read the Bible to each other, so I'm
Right.
not even entirely sure where I think I'm okay, but I'm not entirely sure where we left off.
I don't know. I missed last week because I was at a work conference, so I actually don't know either.
You were at a work, what kind of a conference?
It was a small workshop. It was like, I don't know, maybe 60 people.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Do you learn a lot when you go to those?
Yeah, I like the small ones. So 60 people is a good size. Yeah. So it was a good one. It was a good week.
Well, Come on, Fred, it's 5:28 on my computer. I don't know if it's what
Same.
does, oh, wait a minute, here comes somebody.
Uh-oh, here we go. Oh, there we
There he
go.
is.
Yeah, hi Sue. Hi Rachel.
Hey.
We were wondering where John was. Did he say he was going to be away?
He didn't mention it last week. No,
Oh, no, and he's always very prompt.
yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Hmm.
And I'm not sure about Harold. He's been in and out of the country the last few
Right.
weeks.
Right, and back and forth to California and so on. I didn't tell Rachel what we covered last week, was it because I wasn't entirely sure where we were.
Yeah. Yeah, actually the coming Shabbat, we actually are going to read two parshas. It's one of those when we read two, they're Behar and Bechukotai, and that finishes up the book of Leviticus.
Okay.
Let's wait
Okay,
another
so
minute just to see if John
I
shows.
have that we're on chapter 25, is that
Yeah,
correct?
yeah, Behar starts with chapter 25. Yeah.
Okay. So we're going to finish with, oh yeah, right. We're almost to the end of Leviticus.
Yeah.
Okay, Rachel and I are ready whenever you're ready.
Okay. Right. Um, yeah, there are a bunch of interesting things actually in this reading. The first one is the sabbatical year, and that's the first seven verses, 1 through 7 of chapter 25. So if one of you wants to read that.
The Lord spoke to Moses on Mount Sinai. Speak to the Israelite people and say to them, when you enter the land that I have assigned to you, the land shall observe a Sabbath of the Lord. 6 years you may sow your field, and 6 years you may prune your vineyard and gather in the yield. But in the seventh year the land shall have a Sabbath of complete rest, a Sabbath of the Lord. You shall not sow your field or prune your vineyard. You shall not reap the aftergrowth of your harvest or gather the grapes of your untrimmed vines. It shall be a year of complete rest for the land. But you may eat whatever the land during this Sabbath will produce, you and your male and female slaves, the hired and the bound laborers who live with you, and your cattle and the beasts in your land may eat all its yield.
Yeah. So basically, every seventh year, you don't work the land at all. Um, but actually, this is one of these laws. It's also in Exodus in chapter 23, and it's in Deuteronomy in chapter 15, and each one gives a slightly different version of it. In Deuteronomy, they also add that all debtors will be forgiven that year. So it's more than just letting than just not working the land. Apparently, this was carried out. Josephus talks about it. In fact, even Josephus actually has a story about during the times when the Maccabees were fighting the Greeks, there was one city that had to surrender because it was being besieged, during the sabbatical year, and there wasn't enough food stored in there to sustain the city. So we do know that the sabbatical year was observed. And, you can argue probably at a time nobody knew about crop rotation. It probably was a good idea to let the land lie fallow every seventh year. It was probably, better for future crops anyway. Um, but there's also, it's not here, but I think it's in Deuteronomy, also anything that grows of itself in the field, you have to leave for the poor to take during that year. So that differs a little bit from the account that they give over here. Um,
But it
there
says
are
you may
some,
eat, yeah, but it
yeah, go
says,
ahead.
but you may eat whatever the land during the Sabbath year will produce.
Yeah, and this is one place there is a contradiction because in one of the other accounts, and I forget if it's in Exodus or Deuteronomy, it says anything that grows of itself during that year, you have to leave, for the poor to glean. They're not allowed to do anything in the field. Because you have to remember, if you have animals, you're getting milk and cheese and meat, from your animals. So it's not, and if you have fruit trees, fruit's going to grow on trees even if you're not taking care of it during that year. So it's not as if nothing at all is being produced during that time. And supposedly there are some farmers, even in modern Israel today, who actually do that, though they kind of cheat. A lot of them actually, it's kind of a legal fiction. They actually sign ownership of the field over to a Muslim, to an Arab for that year. So it's really kind of cheating. It's like a Shabbos goy type, thing, for Shabbat. So
So mainly it would be there wouldn't be any grain, right?
yeah, very little. Yeah. There could
Okay.
be some seeds left over from the harvesting the year before that might grow by themselves. It might be a little bit. But basically, what you have probably is fruit trees, that would yield some even without any care. And you'd have your animals, as a source of food.
Right.
Yeah.
But
If you,
did they store grain for the year that they couldn't grow
you
it?
would assume, if you were doing this, you would assume the sixth year, you would try to store away as much as you can for the seventh year ahead. And
But then
again,
when
according,
Pesach comes around, you have to dump it, right?
I never thought about that. What
I
you
don't
do?
know.
Yeah, that's an interesting question.
Huh.
Maybe, maybe I'll save that for the rabbi. I never really thought about that.
Okay.
Yeah. And then actually starting with verse 8 is really one of the strangest institutions in the Bible, the Jubilee year. And that actually from verses 8 through 17. It's
Okay.
really kind of interesting.
All right. And
Somebody wants to read that, 8 through
sure.
17.
And you shall count you 7 Sabbaths of years, 7 years, 7 times. And the days of the 7 Sabbaths of years shall come to 49 years. And you shall send round a blasting ram's horn in the 7th month, on the 10th of the month, on the day of atonement. You shall send round a ram's horn through all your land. And you shall hallow the 50th year, and call a release in the land to all its inhabitants. A jubilee it shall be for you, and you shall go back, each man to his holding, and each man to his clan. You shall go back. It is a jubilee, the 50th year it shall be for you. You shall not sow, and you shall not reap its aftergrowths, and you shall not pick its untrimmed vines, for it is a jubilee. It shall be holy for you. From the field you may eat its yield. In this jubilee year you shall go back, each man to his holding, and when you sell property to your fellow, or buy from the hand of your fellow, you shall not defraud one another. By the number of years after the jubilee you shall buy from your fellow, and by the number of years of yield he shall sell to you. The larger the number of years, the more you shall pay for its purchase, and the smaller the number of years, the less you shall pay for its purchase, since he is selling you the number of yields. And you shall not defraud each other, and you shall fear your God, for I am the Lord your God. And you shall do my statutes and my laws, you shall keep and do them, and you shall dwell on the land securely.
So this is called the Jubilee year, and it actually the word Jubilee really comes from the Hebrew word Yovel, which is a horn that they blow to mark the beginning of the year. Jubilee comes from Yovel. If you look at verse 10, that's really where they get the inscription of the Liberty Bell in Philadelphia. You shall proclaim. It's really, the translation you read from is more accurate. It really says, "You shall proclaim release throughout the land to all the inhabitants of the land." But the founding fathers took a little bit different translation and said, "Proclaim liberty throughout the land and to all the inhabitants thereof." And that's what they put on the Liberty Bell. Although it really is the Hebrew drawer is the word. It really does mean release, not liberty. They kind of stretch the meaning a little bit for that. The problem is most scholars believe it was probably never carried out. Right? Josephus is the best historian we have for that time, and he doesn't mention it at all. There are a couple of reasons. Number one is that you're going to have two sabbatical years in a row, Year 49 is the sabbatical year, but then they're saying in year 50 you can't reap or sow or work the land. So then you got 2 full years, and it's not until the third year that you can start sowing again. So it's going to be almost 3 years before you can have any new food to eat. So that alone, would have been a huge problem. Um, the other problem with it is all land going back to the original owner. You can imagine the chaos, that would cause. You can see in the part that you read, they try to adjust for that. Like if you're buying or selling a field, you have to figure how many years of crops will I get out of it before it has to go back to the original owner. So they tried to work it that way. But it's really just kind of a chaotic thing. And of course, the other thing was that I don't think they mention it over here, but in other parts of the Torah, it says that slaves were also freed during that year. So this is going to be a massive upheaval of society. Um, it also assumes that everybody had pretty much an equal holding of land. We don't really know that for sure. A lot of, it describes in the book of Joshua how they conquer the land, and then they draw lots to see which tribe gets which piece of land. And then within the tribe, they draw lots again for each family to where it gets its land, which sounds great. But a lot of historians really believe that anything worked out that neatly. And so, they were probably in the unequal land holdings to begin with. Um, The other problem was, the ideal appears to be that land should always stay in families. No family should ever lose its land. It's kind of like Thomas Jefferson's vision for America in colonial times, and he believed that farming was the healthiest way of life. He didn't like cities or industry or factories or anything. And the ideal society would be every family having its own land. But the problem was, again, you had big families in those days. And if you had to divide the land, among even two sons, each one got half. And then if each one of them had two sons, it's not going to be very many generations before there's not enough land left for anybody. So it really didn't work out that way. There have been societies historically that try to get around that, like what the English aristocracy did in the 17th and 18th century, where is the oldest son got the land and the title, and the younger sons just had to go out and make a living on their own. Because they realized if you divided up the land, after a while there'd be nothing for anybody. So the whole thing was kind of on a shaky foundation. But basically, the real rationale behind the whole thing um, is really that God owns everything, and therefore, nobody has a right to hold everything forever. Um, but again, no society has ever done this, and it's really it's really looked at by most scholars as an ideal. That would be an ideal thing, but it's not something you could really practically do. In fact, even the sabbatical year, the idea that all debts would be forgiven, uh, the rabbis really had to work a way around that because basically nobody would lend. I mean, they were thinking really about the poor who needed loans. If it were 1 or 2 years before the sabbatical year, who's going to lend you money knowing that it's going to be canceled next year? And so actually it was Hillel in the first century who actually came up with a workaround. They invented a legal fiction where all debts were actually taken up by the court. They sort of put in escrow during that year. The court held the note and it didn't go back to the creditor until the year after the sabbatical year, which is kind of a legal fix just to work around that because it obviously wasn't going to be workable. The other factor that probably figured into this, it's very possible that when these laws were made, the Israelites were still nomads, driving flocks and herds. And they were a long way away from what we would call the commercial society. But by the time you got to the Greco-Roman period, where you had big cities, people living in them, merchants and craftsmen, and you had a financial system, then it really became impossible, just to forgive everything every seventh year. And so it probably never got carried out. Mm. In fact, actually, one piece of evidence that we know that it wasn't carried out is that you see the prophets denouncing it. The prophets were already in the eighth and seventh and sixth centuries BCE, well after these laws. And we know, for instance, Isaiah, there's a famous verse in Isaiah. It says, "Woe unto those who join house to house and field to field until there is no room for anyone to live." So apparently, the land was passing into the hands of rich people. The poor were losing their lands if they were in debt. They were becoming tenant farmers, of the lands of the wealthy. So it never got totally carried out. Although, the ideal remained, and one modern application of it was in 1897, when the first Zionist Congress was held in Switzerland, they decided to set up the Jewish National Fund. And the idea was that money that was raised from the Jewish National Fund would be used to buy land in Israel. And these lands will be available to individuals or to communes, to kibbutzim, but with the proviso that it could only be used for the benefit of the community. It couldn't be used to make profit. In other words, you couldn't resell the land for a profit. You couldn't mortgage it and get money. The Jewish National Fund would let you have the land that it had bought, but only if you were going to work the land, to do something that would be a benefit in developing the land. So really, in that form, basically the ideal sort of hung on. And in the Jewish National Fund, in the early years of Zionism, you really had kind of an application of that. And then there's a third part of that reading that goes from verses 18 through 24, and which kind of goes over the rationale for the whole thing. Um,
You shall observe my laws and faithfully keep my rules so that you may live upon the land of insecurity.
yeah,
The
go
land,
ahead through 24.
the, the land shall yield its fruit, and you shall eat your fill, and you shall live upon it in security. And should you ask, what are we going to eat in the seventh year if we may neither sow nor gather? Here we go with the answer. I will ordain my blessing for you in the sixth year, so that it shall yield a crop sufficient for 3 years. When you sow in the eighth year, you shall still be eating the old grain of that crop, and you will be eating the old grain until the ninth year, until the new crop comes in. But the land must not be sold beyond reclaim, for the land is mine. You are but strangers resident with me. Throughout the land that you hold, you may provide for the redemption of Israel.
Yeah. So basically, what they're saying is that the land is holy in a sense. It really belongs to God. He's letting you live on it as long as you keep His laws. So in a sense, and the rabbis actually developed that kind of idea into a lot of other different things. For instance, if you're tithing, you're not giving to the poor 10% of what's yours. God's letting you keep 90% of what's His. What they're saying is, ultimately nobody really owns anything. We're all here for a short while. Nothing that we have is, is really permanent, and that really reinforces it. I really wonder how many Israelites really believe, they were going to get enough of a crop in the 48th, year to carry them through the next 3 years. Although again, if you remember the story of the famine in Egypt, they piled up enough grain during the 7 good years to sustain the 7 bad years. So I guess the idea is possible. Um,
I guess, and there seems there are like a lot of famines, right? So maybe they were kind of used to it.
it could be, yeah. And grain actually, even without refrigeration, you can store grain for a while to keep it dry, and
Yeah.
it doesn't get
It's a
moldy, and
desert,
you
so
you keep animals out. Yeah,
yeah.
you could store it for a while. Um, Yeah. And then the rest of it really goes over the details of that. Um, let's turn over to verse 35. And verse 35 again goes into another iteration on a common theme, which is how the poor is supposed to be treated. And here in 35 through 36, here it shows you how you have to treat one of your fellow Israelites who has gotten into debt and has to sell himself in order to pay it off. And so these are verses 35 through 46. Someone wants to read that.
Okay. And should your brother come to ruin, and his hand buckle under you, you shall hold him as sojourning settler, and he shall live under you. You shall not take from him advance interest or accrued interest, and you shall fear your God. You shall not give him your silver for advance interest, and for accrued interest you shall not give him your food. I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan to be God for you. And should your brother come to ruin under you and be sold to you, you shall not work him the work of a slave. Like a resident hireling he shall be under you. Till the Jubilee year he shall work under you, and he shall be released from you, he and his children with him, and go back to his clan, and to his father's holdings he shall go back. For they are my slaves, whom I brought out of the land of Egypt. They shall not be sold in a slave's sale. You shall not hold crushing sway over him, and you shall fear your God. And your male slave and your slave girl, whom you may have from the nations that are around you, from them you may buy a male slave or a slave girl, and also from the children of the settlers sojourning among them, from them and from their clan that is with them, you may buy whom they have begotten in your land, and they shall become a holding for you. And you shall hold them in estate for your children after you to inherit a holding forever. Them you may work, but your brothers the Israelites, no man shall hold crushing sway over his brother.
So what they're really saying here is, if another Israelite, is kind of going under financially, the first step would be lend him money, but you can't charge any interest. Or try to help him by lending him money at no interest. But if he still can't make it, yeah, he may have to sell himself to you to pay off the debt. We've already had this really in Exodus. This is one of these laws that appears in Exodus and again in Leviticus and again in Deuteronomy. And it's a little bit different each time. In the law that they give you in Exodus, he works for 6 years and you have to let him go the seventh year. Over here, though, you have to let him go the Jubilee year. So even if he's only worked for 2 or 3 years and the Jubilee year comes, then he has to go free then. And the other is that in your attitude toward him, you can't treat him as a slave in the sense of that he's now a degraded person and not equal to you anymore. You have to treat him decently. But then they add something which wasn't in Exodus, that you can't take slaves from other people. This only applies to your brother, another Israelite. If you capture captives in battle, which is how people usually got slaves, and from the Moabites or the Edomites or whoever you happen to be fighting, you can keep them as slaves. They don't go out after 7 years or the Jubilee year, and they're slaves for life. You can leave them to your children as an inheritance. So the Bible really has a two-level thing going on. Hebrew slaves are treated one way, and then slaves from outside Israel are treated another way. And then with chapter 26, this is one of the most notorious passages for Torah readers, in that what he does, um, see, turns. This actually is the next parsha. This is Bechukotai, another parsha. And I'll do some of the reading. If he starts off, if you walk in my statutes and keep my commandments and do them, then I'll give you your rain in their season, and the land will yield the produce, and the trees of the field will yield their fruit, and your threshing shall yield unto the vintage, and the vintage unto the sowing time, and you shall eat your bread until you have enough, and dwell in your land safely. And I will give you peace in the land, and you shall lie down, and none shall make you afraid. And I will cause evil beasts to cease out of the land, neither shall the sword go through your land. And you shall chase your enemies, and they shall fall before you by the sword. And 5 of you shall chase 100, and 100 you chase 10,000, and your enemies shall fall before you by the sword. And I will have respect to you and make you fruitful and multiply you, and will establish my covenant with you. And you shall eat old store long kept, and bring forth the old from before the new. And in other words, you'll have so much stuff stored up from the previous harvest, you'll have a hard time eating it all in time to bring the new stuff in. Um, and I will set my tabernacle among you, and my soul will not abhor you. And I shall walk among you, and you shall and will be your God, and you shall be my people. And I am the Lord your God, who brought you forth out of the land of Egypt, that you shall not be bondmen. And I have broken the bars of your yoke, and make you go upright. Which sounds great, but then starting with verse 14 and going all the way through verse 46 is a long list of all the curses that are going to come upon you that if you don't do this. And this really, in a sense, it's just about the nastiest part of the Torah. And it's interesting. It's the only aliyah that when you're called up to Torah, it's the only aliyah which is not considered an honor. Okay? To be up there when they're reading the curses. And it's actually the tradition in some congregations that whoever is doing the Torah reading reads this part as fast as he can and kind of mumbles through it in a very low voice. Okay? Um, it says, if you will not hearken unto me and will not do the commandments, and if you reject my statutes, and your soul abhors my ordinances, so that you do not do my commandments, but break my covenant, I will do this to you. I will appoint terror over you, even consumption and fever, and make the eyes to fail and the soul to languish. And you shall sow your seed in vain, for your enemies shall eat it. And I'll set my face against you, and you will be smitten before your enemies. Those that hate you shall rule over you, and you shall flee when none pursues you. And it really is describing the ultimate state of anxiety when you flee when nobody's pursuing you. And if you will not yet for these things hearken unto me, then I will chastise you 7 times more for your sins, and I will break the pride of your power. I will make your heaven as iron and your earth as brass, and your strength will be spent in vain, for the land will not yield produce, neither shall the trees of the land yield fruit. And if you walk contrary to me and will not hearken unto me, I will bring 7 times more plagues upon you according to your sins. And I will send the beasts of the field among you, who shall rob you of your children and destroy your cattle, and make you few in number, and your ways shall become desolate. And in spite of these things, you will still not be corrected unto me, but will walk contrary to me. Then I will walk contrary unto you, and I will smite you, even I, 7 times for your sins. And I will bring a sword upon you that will execute the vengeance of the covenant. And you shall be gathered together within your cities, and I will send pestilence among you, and you shall be delivered into the hand of your enemy. And when I break your staff of bread, 10 women shall bake your bread in one oven, and they shall deliver your bread again by weight, and you shall eat and not be satisfied. What they're saying is that there'll be so little grain, so little bread to bake. The 10 women will have room in one oven to bake all the bread that there is. And the bread will be of such poor quality that it will actually fall apart in your hands. So rather than counting it by a loaf, you have to weigh the scraps. And that's what they mean by weight. And if you will for all this not hearken unto me, but walk contrary to me, then I will walk contrary to you into fury, and I will chastise you 7 times for your sins. And you shall eat the flesh of your sons, and the flesh of your daughters shall you eat. And according to Josephus, although he may be exaggerating, when the Babylonians were laying siege to Jerusalem before the Babylonian exile, things got so bad that actually people resorted to cannibalism. They were actually literally eating each other. And I will destroy your high places and cast down your sun pillars and cast your carcasses upon the carcasses of your idols, and my soul shall abhor you. And I will make your cities a waste and will bring your sanctuaries into desolation. and I will not smell the savor of your sweet odors. And I will bring the land into desolation, and your enemies that dwell therein shall be astonished after it. And you will I scatter among the nations, and I will draw out the sword after you, and your land shall be desolation, and your cities a waste. Then shall the land have its Sabbaths, so long as it lies desolate. When you are in your enemy's land, even then shall the land rest and repay her Sabbath. And here he's really being sarcastic. You never observe a sabbatical year, when you were supposed to. So now I'm going to get rid of you, and the land will finally have some rest, of a rest that you didn't give to it. As long as it lies desolate, it shall have rest, even the rest which it had not in your Sabbaths when you dwelt upon it. And as for them that are left of you, I will send faintness into their heart in the land of their enemies, and the sound of a driven leaf shall chase them. And they shall flee as one flees from the swords, and they shall stumble when none pursues, and they shall stumble one upon the other, as it were before the sword when none pursueth. And you shall have no power to stand before your enemies, and you shall perish among the nations, and the land of your enemies shall eat you up. And they that are left of you shall pine away in iniquity in your enemies' lands, and in the iniquities of their fathers shall they pine away with them. And they shall confess their iniquity and the iniquity of their fathers, and in their treachery which they committed against me, and also that they have walked contrary to me. I will also walk contrary to them, and bring them into the land of their enemies. If then perchance their uncircumcised hearts be humbled, and they then be paid the punishment of their iniquity, then will I remember my covenant with Jacob, and my covenant with Isaac, and also my covenant with Abraham will I remember, and I will remember the land. And the land shall lie forsaken without them, and shall be paid her Sabbaths, while she lies desolate without them. And they shall be paid the punishment of their iniquity, because they rejected my ordinances, and their souls abhorred my statutes. And yet, for all that, when they are in the land of their enemies, I will not reject them, neither will I abhor them to destroy them utterly, and to break my covenant with them, for I am the Lord their God. But I will, for their sake, remember the covenant of their ancestors, whom I brought forth out of the land of Egypt in the sight of the nations, that I might be their God. I am the Lord. And then these are the statutes and ordinances and laws which the Lord made between him and the children of Israel in Mount Sinai by the hand of Moses. Um, so again, this is one of the longest aliyahs that's read in the whole cycle of Torah reading. And there's actually a legend, one of the Hasidic rabbis in Europe, whenever this reading came around, he would always insist on taking it himself. He didn't want any of the members of his congregation to be associated with it. And, and this is actually probably where the book of Leviticus probably originally ended. And chapter 27 appears to be some extra stuff that was tacked on later on. And this is basically, if you wanted to make a contribution to the sanctuary above and beyond, what the usual tithes and stuff, this is what would be required of you. How you would be evaluated according to whether you were a man or a woman and what age you were at, and so forth. And that's the first 14 verses of chapter 27. Um, Somebody wants to read those 14 verses.
I'll read the verse 1 through 14.
Okay.
Adonai spoke to Moses, saying, Speak to Israelite people and say to them, when any party explicitly vows to Adonai, the equivalent for a human being, the following scale shall apply. If it is male from 20 to 60 years of age, the equivalent is 50 shekels of silver by the sanctuary weight. If it is female, the equivalent is 30 shekels. If the age is from 5 to 20, the equivalent is 20 shekels for a male and 10 shekels for a female.
Rachel and
If
I
the
don't think this is fair.
This is not a politically correct Parsha, but that was then and this is now.
There it is.
Go ahead, Harold.
Okay, I think it should be the other way around too. So
Yeah.
if the age is from 1 month to 5, the equivalent for a male is 5 shekels of silver, and the equivalent for a female is 3. If the age is 60 years or over, oh Fred, you and I gotta look out.
Yeah,
The
that was
equivalent
ancient in
is
those days.
Yeah, the equivalent is 15 shekels in the case of a male and 10 shekels for a female. But if one cannot afford the equivalent, that person shall be presented before the priest, and the priest shall make an assessment. The priest shall make the assessment according to what the vower can afford. If the vow concerns any animal that may be brought as an offering to Adonai, any such that may be given to Adonai shall be holy. One may not exchange or substitute another for it, either good for bad or bad for good. If one does substitute one animal for another, the thing vowed and its substitute shall both be holy. If the vow concerns any impure animal that may not be brought as an offering to Adonai, the animal shall be presented before the priest, and the priest shall assess it. Whether high or low, whatever assessment is set by the priest shall stand. And if one wishes to redeem it, 1/5 must be added to its assessment. If any party consecrates a house to Adonai, the priest shall assess it, whether high or low, as the priest assesses it, so shall it stand.
Yeah. A lot of this is just in a lot of details about how to make contributions. But what they really seem to be saying is they're valuing people according to what their economic productivity would be. So the maximum, and actually would hold true even now. Your maximum economic productive years are probably between 20 and 60. That's when you're probably going to make most of your income and contribute most to the economy. So that they're really kind of basing it on that. It's kind of interesting that there's no valuation for a baby under 1 month of age. They don't say for birth.
Or from 1 year to 5 years, right?
Well, it says from 1 year to 5 years. Well, verse 6, though, it says if it be from a month old even to 5 years old.
Oh, if it
Yeah.
be for a month. Oh, okay. Sorry, my translation says up to a
Yeah.
year.
So there's no
Okay.
valuation for an infant under a month old. And actually, apparently, you weren't considered really a member of the community during the first month. It may have been because in the ancient world there was such a high perinatal morbidity. A lot of kids didn't make it, past the first month. And so, you sort of had to wait a month to really know if the kid was actually going to grow up or not. Um, and even today in Orthodox communities, if a baby under a month dies, you don't observe the normal mourning customs. You don't sit shiva for it. You don't do any of the usual, you don't say Kaddish. You don't do the usual stuff that you would do, for someone older than 1 month old. So there's still this tradition that you really are not quite a member of the community yet until you're a month old. And then there's one other interesting thing right toward the end of it. Um, in verses 28 and 29, right toward the end of it, they say, notwithstanding no devoted thing that a man may devote unto the Lord of all he hath, whether it's man or beast or the field of his possession, shall be sold or redeemed. Every devoted thing is most holy unto the Lord. None devoted that may be devoted of men shall be ransomed. He shall surely be put to death. It sounds really weird, but your translation may be different, but the Hebrew word that they're translating as devoted is harem. And harem takes a lot of different meanings. Harem often means something that's set aside, only meant for God, and it can't be used for any other purpose. That's one meaning. But it also means something that has to be destroyed. It can't be used in the community, it has to be destroyed. A good example would be there's that episode in the book of Samuel, where King Saul is fighting the Amalekites, and Samuel the prophet tells them, God says you have to kill all the Amalekites, don't spare anybody. They're the ultimate enemy of Israel. Kill them all, and even all the animals. They're in Pharaoh. You're not allowed to get any kind of benefit from this victory. And then Saul decides, well, there are all these great animals. It's a shame, it's a shame to have to destroy everything, and he keeps the animals and let Agag, the king of the Amalekites, live. And when Samuel finds out about it, he says, because you've not obeyed God, the kingdom's going to be taken away from you. Those people were in harem. They can't be put to any use. They have to be destroyed. But later on, during the Greco-Roman period, the harem thing took a little bit different meaning. It was kind of a sanction the rabbis were used. If somebody had disobeyed, the laws, he could be put in harem for a number of days or a number of weeks. And if you were put in harem, nobody would do business with you. Nobody would speak with you. Nobody was allowed to come within 4 cubits of you, which was about 6 feet. You were sort of being banned from the community for that period of time. And you have to remember that was the only sanction that the rabbis of the Sanhedrin had during that time. Somebody else always had the power, whether it was the Hasmonean kings or the Roman procurators or Herod or whoever was actually ruling the land. The only real coercion that the rabbis had was the moral prestige that the people held them in, and the putting someone in harem. Saying if you disobeyed a judgment from the rabbinic court, they couldn't put you in jail. They couldn't punish you that way, but they could put you in harem, which meant that for a given period of time, nobody would have anything to do with you. That's the one sanction, that they really had. So that's the meaning the harem took then. And occasionally someone might be actually, it was rare, but somebody might actually be excluded from the community, on a lifetime basis. That was very rare. But that's what happened to Spinoza during the 17th century. The Jewish community in Amsterdam actually put him in harem for, permanently, which, it sounded like an awful thing to do, but you have to remember that he was publishing opinions which were horrifying both Jews and Christians. And the Jews of Amsterdam in the 17th century didn't have Dutch citizenship. They were there at the pleasure of the government. And these were people who had escaped the Spanish and Portuguese Inquisition. There was no other country in Europe where Jews could live. And so Spinoza was really endangering the entire community, by what he was doing. And so they probably did the right thing for the community. But that would be the most extreme measure of harem. And most of the time, you were just put in harem for a few days or weeks as kind of a sanction, and it was used that way. But actually, the word was taken up into other languages. Is where we get the word harem. Harem really means a forbidden place, a place that no one except the king could go. His women were kept secluded from the world, and so in a sense, they were in harem, and the harem really comes from that. Um, any questions about what we covered here? Okay.
No.
It's interesting. The church picked up on this idea of a jubilee year, but not in the sense in which it's really here. The Pope decided that every 50 years would be a jubilee year in which pilgrims could come to Rome to celebrate every 50 years. But it wasn't letting the land lie fallow or forgiving debts or any of that. They were basically using it for fundraising. You wanted to get a lot of pilgrims into Rome who would spend a lot of money. It was good for the Roman economy. So the church jubilees really were not the same as the jubilee that Leviticus describes. And actually, next week we begin the book of Numbers, which is basically chapter 1 of the book of Numbers. So,
Okay.
Okay. Any questions about anything we covered this week? Yeah. I miss John. He always asks a lot of questions.
I know.
I wonder
Hopefully
where
he'll
he
be
is.
back.
It's so unlike him to not tell us if he's not going to
I
be with us.
know.
I
Yeah, I
know.
hope he's okay. You're
Yes,
right. It's
I
not like
do
him
too.
just not to show up. So, well,
Right.
hopefully he'll be back next week. So,
Yes, let's hope so.
yeah. So I'll see you guys again next week.
All right.
We're
Thank
ready to
you.
start numbers.
That's right.
Ready to start numbers next week. Yeah.